Welcome to AFTV5. I'm your host, Dr. Yolanda Gamble, founder and president of Sure Ministries Incorporated. I'm so happy to be with you on this evening, as well as a great, powerful panelist that we have tonight as we discuss repairing the inequity exposed by the coronavirus pandemic crisis. And I know many of you of our audience know the latest news reports. You've been hearing the news reports. This pandemic has exposed so much in our society that many people are under a lot of distress or unrest, trying to find their way through. What do I do? We're sheltering in place. You know, how long is this going to be? A lot of questions. But yet and still, there is a platform that we have created where we are going to discuss some of the unrest and some of the things that are going on in our community to hopefully be able to bring a balance to things as well as solutions. So I want you to stay with us this evening. I'm going to be introducing our panelists very shortly here. We're going to be focusing on how to build diversity towards inclusion. Oh, wow, this is going to be good. This is going to be really, really good. You want to stay here with me? Wow, this is going to be great. How to build diversity towards inclusion and equity. It's very important that we now start focusing on the solutions. How can we live better? How can we live better together, right? With all the mix of races and cultures and creeds and religions, and there's a lot of diversity in America. But I believe with all my heart that we can come to one place where we can reason together, where we can really become a community, a community. And so tonight I have wonderful guests that are professionals in education and even in the field of diversity and inclusion and equity. They are professionals. I mean, they have dedicated their lives to this stuff. So you certainly want to hear from them. I have guest Dr. Stephanie Hawley. Dr. Stephanie Hawley. She's a PhD equity officer with Austin Independent School District. Let's welcome her. Let's welcome her. Thank you so much for joining us. And then also we have Mr. Larry M. Davis. He's the Chief Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer with Austin Community College in Austin, Texas. Let's welcome him as well. Thank you so much for being with us. And also we have Mr. Khari Williams. He's Director of The Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Campus Center. I'm so happy to have him as well. Let's welcome him. What I would like for our panelists to do, of course, they'll have to, since we are doing this by Zoom, you'll have to remember, this is what I forget sometimes, remember to take your microphone off of mute. Too many times I've done meetings and I'm just talking right away. You know how we do. And then no one even heard anything that I've said. I have to start all over. But just remember, I'm going to start with Dr. Stephanie Hawley. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in the community.
Wow. So I am the equity officer at Austin Independent School District, inaugural, as we often say. I've been there a little over a year now. But I've been in education about 39 years in some capacity. I've taught first grade, fifth grade, ninth grade, teachers who thought they wanted, people who thought they wanted to be teachers. I've taught administrators, guest lecture. I had the privilege, the high privilege of serving as an equity officer at Austin Community College for some years as well. And I consider it a privilege and just I just can't say enough about how education allows me to do some of the social justice work that I think I was born to.
Oh,
And,
fantastic.
and excited about being on the panel tonight. And I thank you all for extending this invitation to talk about the things that I care so deeply about.
We're just so happy to have you. And as I said to our audience, Dr. Stephanie, she is totally dedicated, as you all have heard, her commitment and the years of commitment that she has given to our communities at large in this subject. And thank you so much for your dedication. Thank you for your service and all that you have done. We certainly do appreciate it. And she doesn't even look like she's done this work for 39 years. I'm like, you look 39.
I like you. We're going to be friends.
Exactly. But we're so happy to have you. Thank you so much. And Larry, Mr. Larry Davis, God bless you. So happy to have you on tonight. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Thank you, Yolanda. First of all, we appreciate this opportunity to participate in this very important subject matter that you're facilitating and leading us in. I've worked also for 30 years, but not quite all in education. I'm a bivocational minister. I have served at the middle school, high school, community college, and university level, working with student success and working with equity. And it's always been a part of my life's journey to do what I believe was to help the underdog, to basically assist those who, for whatever reason, whether society imposed it upon them or whether they didn't. My goal has always been to help equip people with the resources and support that they need to be successful. And I say to Dr. Hawley, again, I thank her for planting a good seed at ACC, and we plan to continue this great work and make a difference in the community and in the surrounding area. So thank you for the moment to share, and I look forward to the rest of this evening.
Thank you so much for the position that you're holding now for only a couple of months. But as we can see, yes, Dr. Stephanie has laid a great foundation. That's fantastic. And then we have a man of faith that is in that position. I believe that we should have the balance of the natural and the spiritual. Wouldn't you all agree? We need that. Yeah, the body is three-dimensional, the body, the soul, and the spirit. And we need the balance in order to live life successfully. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Minister Larry Davis.
Larry, you and I have that in common. I'm a licensed Baptist minister as well.
Really? I'm a minister too. Wow. This is fantastic.
I told you this is spiritual work.
This is spiritual work. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. Well, let's just hear from Dr. Khari Williams. We're just so happy to have you. Thank you for joining us. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for the introduction, Dr. Gamble. Thank you, Mr. Davis and Dr. Hawley, for allowing me to share this space with you. I'm probably the baby of the group because I've only been in higher education for about 14 years, and I've only been in Austin or in Texas for about 9 months now. But I've served in various roles in higher education, including inclusion work. And my role now is the director of the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Campus Center, where my vision is essentially that we have a responsibility, a charge to make sure that every single student that walks into ACC is able to bring their full selves. They'll be able to, they should be feel fully welcome and fully able to be a part of the community, whether at ACC. And we should do a good job of educating and growing and developing them in their field. We also should equip them with the tools to really flourish and thrive in the workforce or their next chapter after ACC. So what that means is that we have to provide them with spaces and places and opportunities to grow in the area of being able to engage around inclusion issues, being able to have tough conversations, being able to talk with people that have different cultures and to share different religions and different personal beliefs. If we don't provide that opportunity, how are they going to grow in that way? So if they walk across the stage at ACC or any institution of higher education without being equipped in that way, then I feel like we've kind of missed part of our responsibility and part of our charge. It's all about building the best and brightest leaders of tomorrow. And we have to do that by making sure they're doing well academically, but also making sure that we are engaging them in these tough conversations around what it means to be in a diverse world, be in a diverse community, work in a diverse workforce, and thrive in that environment.
Exactly, and totally, I'm sure we all totally agree with you and concur. And yes, we're really in that environment. I have not visited the Austin Community College. I have to say that I've only been in Texas for a short time, just a couple of years or so, no, 3 years now. And I came from Maryland after 19 years. And, but I can truly say I love Austin. I've come here and done many ministry type assignments, conferences. I've brought conferences here to Austin, and I have family who lives in Austin. So Austin is home, you know, Austin is home. And I'm so proud to hear what you all are doing at the Austin Community College and then abroad into our educational school system. It's so awesome. It's so wonderful. I want to jump right on into our panel questions. And certainly I want to start with ladies first because I'm a little old fashioned. That's just the way I am, guys.
No problem.
That's the way it is. And I'd just like to ask Dr. Stephanie, what is your definition of equity, diversity, and inclusion? What is your definition?
So when it comes to equity, I'll start with equity.
Sure.
Equity is a condition that would exist if we could no longer predict who was going to be successful based on their race or socioeconomics or any human differences or their background. So if we had equity, that means that I could look at graduation rates and I wouldn't be able to guess which group was successful in the system and which group wasn't. And equity has another part to it for me as well, is it's about changing the system, because a lot of times people want to change the people, and the students have to tuck in parts of their identity to be accepted and to feel safe. Depending on, you know, what their sexual orientation may be, whether they're documented, you know, whether or not they are, their citizenship status. And so if we truly had equity, systems would change so that people could bring their full selves into the space. For me, diversity is necessary, but it's not sufficient to get to equity. So you can't get to equity without diversity. You really do need the full, the full diversity of human beings in any organization. A lot of times people say, we want to have excellence. Well, you can't have excellence without diversity, and you can't have excellence without equity as well. And so diversity means that, you know, I can walk into a room and I can see a group of people, and it makes for beautiful photo ops, right? You know, you have Black, brown, Native American, you can see God's glory in a room. But if the people of color do not have power and agency, and they can't affect change, systemic change, policies and practices, then all you've got is a beautiful, diverse room. And so that's why I say diversity is necessary, but it's not sufficient. And then inclusion is the same way. You can be included. You know, we hear people say all the time, I want a seat at the table. And I'm like, whose table are you trying to get to? And then we talk about having seats at the table, but if you can't open your mouth at the table, then you just at the table for a photo op. And so diversity sometimes can get drowned out, and inclusion gets drowned out. And we never get to equity, because equity is hard because you're trying to push a system. You are going up against power structures that are difficult. And what power structures would rather do is create patios and what I call gazebos. So, you know, you can have a special month, you can have a special week, you can have a special day, you can have celebrations, but don't come in here trying to change policies and practices, because equity really is about power. And I tell people, you know, you've got equity when money moves, you know, budget is allocated to change the system, not to create a program, you know, we have special programs. If Black men, community college, perfect example, where I spent a good part of my life, Black men, instead of us changing the system and teaching our professors sometimes what they need to do to be more inclusive and to embrace and build on the strengths of Black men, what we do is create a Black men's program. And then we create a Latino men's program. And then we create, so there's something wrong with the house, right? Like the house looks beautiful from the street, but when you come in, Black men are being rained on. Latinas sometimes can't get into the STEM programs. So what we do is we just make a special program outside the house. Equity means that we change the foundation of that house so that we don't have to build all these special programs. We'll never have enough money for diversity programs. So I don't know if I answered your question.
You certainly have. You really broke it down very, very well so that we can clearly understand what equity, diversity, and inclusion really, really is and what it looks like. Very, very important, because if we keep segregating ourselves with these special groups, we don't really have the inclusion. We start losing different things, starts filtering out. And I want to ask Minister Larry Davis, why do you think it is important to have equity and diversity and inclusion? You can just choose any one of those and just elaborate. Why do you think it's so important?
Well, it's very important to have equity because we live in an inequitable society and culture. And inequities are really untenable. They may seem like they're omnipotent, but of course only God is omnipotent. Eventually, every system is going to come down. And what we want to do is we want to help it come down in a positive, constructive, strong way so that everyone benefits from it. I agree with Dr. Hawley that we want to move away from segregated types of services, but that's a starting point. What we want to do is we want to make sure we customize the support that people need to be successful. And many times equity is defined as giving people what they need in order to be successful. And at the same time, we do need to address those power structures and systems and processes that create the inequities to begin with. So it is necessary for us to work from multiple strategies and multiple ways to bring down these inequities and replace them with more equitable systems and structures so that everyone has the opportunity to prosper and to be the best that they can be.
Oh, I really totally agree with that. And, you know, I'm thinking in terms, as you were speaking, being able to cross the room and go and meet someone of a different race, a different, you know, belief or however. And it's so important that we be able to cross that room, because so many times we're looking over and we say, but you're not like me, you know, you're not in the same economic status, or what. We have so many things going in our mind. You know, I can't relate because I don't know where you come from. I'm not from New York. I'm from Texas. I mean, we have so many different variations of reason why we don't really cross the room and really meet people. But it's very, very important that we do, because it's certainly, it just creates a wonderful culture of diversity and equity. And I also want to ask Dr. Khari, how are you currently implementing equity, diversity, and inclusion into your profession, school, or business? Because I kind of heard you in your introduction, you know, elaborate a little bit about what you are doing right now and what you believe. So will you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, so my philosophy, and I believe that of the colleagues, we share that as well at ACC, is that that community colleges, higher education in general, is one of the greatest economic stabilizers in our society. And what I mean by that is, if a student is able to obtain a credential, a degree, that it increases their earning power, it increases their ability to take care of their families, it increases the likelihood that that next generation is gonna go into higher education and get some credentials as well. So though it's not necessarily not life or death, like I'm not a police officer, I'm not a EMT worker, I still believe it's almost life or death. Like, we have the ability to benefit our students in a way that's going to change their lives, it's going to change their families' lives. But the same is opposite. If we don't properly support the students that we recruit and we bring to our institution, we have the ability to do great harm, because if they leave our institution without a credential, without a degree, without a certificate, they're also likely leaving with debt. They're also likely leaving with student loans. They default on those loans. They can't go to another institution. If they have debt with ACC, we're not going to release their transcripts. So we've left them worse off. So what we're doing at ACC is, we have a variety of different affinity groups. Affinity groups is essentially groups targeted at supporting some of our most underserved or most vulnerable populations in being successful at ACC. So it's providing some of the out of the classroom support around providing connections, providing mentorship, providing connections within their own community. But then I think with the TRHT Center is also bringing a conversation to the forefront in a safe space, in an intentional space, where every student is receiving some education around diversity, equity, inclusion. I think for so long we have been in the kind of mode of bringing our students in, educating them on their field and shipping them out. But I believe with everything going on in our society right now, we have to equip them in a way where they can also engage in that conversation and engage in that policy change and law change to make our communities more equitable, to make the companies or the institutions that will be going in more equitable. So what we're doing is doing monthly programming for students, for staff, and for faculty around how you engage in this important conversation of diversity, equity, inclusion, how you navigate those tough conversations, how you are able to kind of do your own self-assessment and understand where you're at, what stereotypes or biases have impacted you as an individual. What are some positive experiences you've had around your identity? What are some negative experiences that you've had around your identity? How can you share those with others so they can learn, get an understanding of how this world, how this society, how even the Austin community has impacted them differently because of their identity. So it's having some of those conversations in a way that's going to make them more well-rounded for the community, for that next journey, whether it's more higher education or going into the workforce, and it's adding value to what they're receiving at ACC.
Oh, that's fantastic. I also want to ask Dr. Hawley, what are you all doing there at ISD, Austin ISD?
Wow.
To implement this?
So over the last year and a month that I've been there, I got there about August 1st last year. One of the things we do that's so crucial to this work is helping people, and I love what Dr. Williams was saying about teaching people how to have conversations, right? So we use a model around a Pacific Educational Group. They do Courageous Conversation. And the Truth and Racial Healing Center, which I don't know if this is still true, but the Truth and Racial Healing Center was at one point, it was the only community college that received the grant for a Truth and Racial Healing Center back a couple of years ago when we applied for that. And part of the work around that we're doing at AISD is around helping people where they are, because people are in different places and talking about equity. Some people can't say race, they can't say white, they can't say white supremacy. And if you can't, it's like James Baldwin said, that if you, we can't even begin to solve what we won't even face. And then we can't face what we won't name, right? And so the conversations help people to begin to have language to express what's happening to them. So part of the work that we've done at AISD has been around teaching people how to talk, to have civil conversation. Most people are afraid. There's fear around conversations around racial inequity. And so we'll use multiculturalism. We'll speak in strange languages so we don't have to name race. So that's been part of the conversation. We do that because the data shows us that race is the greatest predictor of student success and well-being, and even for our staff at AISD. But my first act there was to engage in asset mapping. And I tell anybody who's doing equity work, you need to find what the strengths are, what's working, who gets this, right? Because you have to build community. You have to build, because you can't do this work as an equity officer. Any equity officer that thinks that they're gonna do this work alone, good luck, right? Because you have to build consensus and people, you have to build community as well, so that people can begin to address issues, and you're not the Lone Ranger running around trying to fix things, because that's not how this work is done. So we did a lot of asset mapping, the things that are working, so then we know what we can build upon. Whenever you do asset mapping, though, you're going to find out what doesn't work. And so one of the things that we did over the last year is we put together an equity action plan, because what has happened over the years in almost every institution is people talk about this all day long. They just talk and they talk and they talk, and there's no action. And so equity offices and officers can sometimes be ineffective if there's no real focus. So we put together a 10-point equity framework: leadership development, use of disaggregated data, engage marginalized communities. Make sure that all your plans and your budgets are equity focused, and your budgets are, because I tell people all the time, they're like, how do we know if we have equity? And I say, I look at your budget and I look at your plan, and that tells me what you value, how you spend your money. And when we look in there and we can see that you've made adjustments, you've put more money in so you can bring in more Black and brown teachers, right? That's an equity move. But you can talk about equity, but when you look at somebody's budget, you know, we say budgets are moral documents. And I can tell what you value. You know, if you value shoes or you got a Corvette, I know what you like. And so even the institutions that are saying that they love, you know, they want to get to equity, we don't see the evidence. We hear a lot of talk. So at ASU, we had to hit the ground with some action. And so we've done leadership training, senior leadership training. We're working with our principals because all the decision makers have to be able to talk about race, be able to plan and do the budgeting and engage the communities. And we're helping our students find their power as well. I work with what we call the Cultural Proficiency and Inclusiveness Office with Dr. Angela Ward. And we have a group of students organized for anti-racism, and the students are finding their power. And then we have a student race council where the students are and we're also doing training for the PTA. The PTA is, we've got a lot of parents, mostly white parents, who want to learn how to talk about race and how to address race. And so, you know, the biggest things we have going on is teaching people how to talk, and then also teaching leaders how to take action and be accountable, because it's not enough to talk about it. We have to, you know, get on and be accountable for actual change, because otherwise we just keep putting the onus on the people that come in. We go, well, you know, they're from this and that in their communities. You know, poverty never stopped anybody from learning. We always say that's not an excuse. What does the system need to do differently to see the genius in Black and brown children? And I always say every child that shows up, Black, white, or brown, has some genius. So how do we change our organizations so they embrace that genius and build on that genius, and not just look at, you know, what's broken, you know, what's the deficit? We teach people, look for the strength, and then you can build the bridge across those deficits. So that's the big, you know, that's a big picture of what we're doing. I want to go into a whole bunch of minute details, but that's our big picture thinking around this work the first year at AISD.
Well, Dr. Hawley, let me ask you, what are some of the challenges that you face in dealing with the equity, inclusion, and diversity? You're on a roll here. I mean, I can just listen to you because I really believe in what you're saying. I really do, and I'm for it. I concur. I'm like, yes, this is good. But we know that there's challenges, and I am going to address the other gentleman as well. But what are some of the challenges in the areas that you just mentioned?
Oh, wow. The biggest challenge we have is fear. We don't name it as fear, but fear of change, fear of loss. We live in a culture that's zero sum, right? So I teach a workshop on white supremacy culture. Most of the time people think white supremacy, oh, that means Klansmen and neo-Nazis. But white supremacy just means that you've edified and elevated white cultural norms as you know, the aspiration. And we think of it as normal. We never interrogate it to see how does it exclude other people, right? So you're up against, and we all got socialized to it. So I always tell people white supremacy culture lives well in Black and brown bodies. I mean, we got educated and socialized to what white people value, believe, and think. And we make those adjustments so we can be successful. Most of us would not be on this, in this conversation today had we not been able to make adjustments to what we know are the culture that has the most power. And so getting beyond fear, and that's why I tell you this is spiritual work, is because the only way you get through fear is by building relationships with people. Yeah. And so the biggest obstacles are the fear of loss of power, right? So people who have control and power and are accustomed to having control, when you start to interrogate things looking at racial equity, people get very antsy because we never learned how to talk about race. Black people talk about race more than anybody. White people rarely talk about race because they don't have to. They don't have to deal with us, it's our survival, right? And so getting people to cross those bridges with one another. You know, my white colleagues at ACC and at AISD were surprised at when I told them what we have to do with our children to make sure they're safe with the police, what we have to say to our children to make sure that they do well in school, because school is not constructed for some of the genius that Black children and the energy and the genius and the different perspectives. So the biggest obstacles I see are fear and people who have a fear of loss of power. And then just, nobody likes change. Everybody wants somebody else to change. Right. Most people don't want change. And so those fears of change, fears of people you don't know. And that's why the Truth and Racial Healing Center and the work that my brothers do at ACC is so important, because you've got to have relationships before people can cross that bridge for change. Yeah. And, but man, it's tough when people are up against fear because they don't know what's on the other side if they decide to change or they reallocate resources. Nobody's ever seen the world that the three of us are trying to build, right? Yes. Like they haven't seen that world. And what they don't know is there's enough liberation, freedom, and joy for everybody. Just because Black people get something and move forward doesn't mean other people are going to lose. It's not a zero-sum game. That's not the way the spirit works. Mm-hmm. But if you've never seen that world, I look like a crazy woman to you when I tell you that there's enough that everybody can be successful. And one day we'll have institutions where we won't be able to predict who's successful by race or ethnicity. And it won't be because, we fixed those Black or brown people. It will be because we fixed the system so that it allowed Black and brown people to bring their full selves into the space. So fear is the elephant that we never address in the space. It's hard, but it can be done. It can be done.
Well, thank God that He has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. But how do we get to that love, power, and a sound mind? Is that we build relationships. Because when we start building relationships, then we are introduced to the love and the care and concern that we can have for one another, and how we can empower one another to excel, no matter who we are. I just appreciate you so much for sharing that. And I know that Minister Larry, that you have some challenges, and I know it's just been a couple of months, but do you foresee any challenges there at ACC that you may want to address now?
Well, at any institution, when you're learning the culture, the background, the written culture and the unwritten culture, the politics, and all of those things that go with being a part of an organization, there's always going to be some challenges. What I can say honestly about ACC is in the time that I've been there, I share the optimism and the hope and the faith that great days are ahead. There is a genuine desire to do equity and to do justly and right by all people. And as Dr. Hawley said, the number one thing, not just at ACC, but everywhere, is fear. She did a great job of explaining on the big picture level what that fear looks like. But in the day-to-day that we're working with people, at previous organizations I worked at, one of the obstacles or one of the challenges is what we call the diversity promoter penalty. And that penalty basically is if you, in applying equity principles, end up hiring people who look like you, that's negatively sometimes is going to be reflected in your evaluations and in your performances. You also have to deal with the resistance. There are some individuals who don't have good intentions, and they actually like things the way that they are, and so it can be a battle. Now, I haven't run into that at ACC at all, but one would be foolish to not anticipate that wherever you are, there's going to be some unexpected challenges that are going to arise. But those are some of the issues that people who do this work face constantly. Being your voice or your opinion being ignored or minimalized. The great thing about it is there are enough. The majority of the people in this country, white, people of color, whatever distinction we want to use, are interested in doing what's right and what's appropriate and what's going to bring about a better society. And like Dr. Hawley said, sometimes it's hard for people to see what that world looks like. But in addition to the great things that we can do as human beings, as we all know, there is a power greater than ourselves that when it gets injected into the picture, the spiritual resources, lasting change comes. So those are some of the challenges. For me personally, like Dr. Hawley, I've been working equity, student success for over 30 years. I've seen just about everything that can come. And I have the resources that I need to withstand and do what I need to do. And the partnerships that I'm going to build, also based upon strengths, based upon asset inventorying. I think we're going to do just fine.
Yes, I believe that. I believe that you are going to do that. And Dr. Williams, you want to chime in? Have you noticed any challenges that maybe you are currently facing or have faced?
Sure. I think I would just say that for me, changing hearts, changing minds, even changing institutions, it takes time. It's not easy work and it doesn't happen overnight. And I think what we have to understand, especially for those leaders like us who are doing this work, is that most of our ideals and perspectives and the way we view the world and the way we view others that are different from us were developed during some of our most vulnerable years. So like 0 to 18. So under like the auspices of our parents and their household, in our community, in the school we went to, in the church we went to. So to invite someone new into your institution and to say, well, that's wrong, or the way you're looking at that is wrong, or the way you feel about that is wrong, is saying to somebody that their whole belief system, that their parents are wrong, that their pastor was wrong, that their teachers were wrong, their community was wrong. And I think you have to be careful how you engage in the conversation, but you also have to understand that that we are all just a product of our experiences, right or wrong, and that it takes time to change those things. And within that, we are all being exposed to these negative messages around, biases and stereotypes and all the different isms in ways where we don't often realize we've been exposed to them. So they've shaped how we think and we don't even realize it. So it's being very careful about how you enter into the conversation. It's being very careful about how you keep people at the table versus shutting them down and pushing them away. And it's being very committed to helping them to understand that this work is hard. I've had students come to me crying and say, I didn't realize that I was doing this, or that what I said was wrong, or that what I was thinking was wrong. I've had faculty and staff do the same thing. So it's understanding that this is hard work, and it's hard work, and you have to stay in it and be and meet people where they are and give some grace to their learning. And I think the same thing with an institution like Austin Community College or any college is that policies, the practices, they've been baked in for so many years that change doesn't happen overnight. So it means that you have to have leaders that are committed to it. As equity workers, we have to be committed to it, and we have to be tough, and we have to be understanding, and we have to allow some grace for learning and making mistakes. Yeah, so I think it's just that staying in the fight, understanding that it's going to take some time. I believe we have some great commitments, and we're taking some great steps at ACC.
Wonderful. Well, you know, I believe we're all committed to the change. Would you all say you're committed to the change? You're in it for the duration. Change is inevitable, and it's happening. It's right now. And I tell you what, we're seeing the results of people like you stand in the race, fighting out, doing whatever it takes to make things happen, to change hearts, change minds, change cultures, change systems, whatever it takes. I'm so proud of every one of you on tonight. I really, really am. I want to ask you some more questions though tonight, because there's so much knowledge, a wealth of knowledge is with us. And I want our audience to realize that you are really getting educated. For some of you that don't know the severity of equality and different other just how important inclusion is and all of that. And maybe you don't see yourself as being a prejudiced person. Sometimes it's unbeknownst to us. We don't realize we're addressing someone wrongly by behaving a certain way or calling them a certain name or whatever type of language that we may be using. And so I call these unconscious bias. And considering the unrest within our country, among this coronavirus pandemic, it may have exposed unconscious or implicit bias among races. I want to know what your thoughts are on this. And Minister Davis, what are your thoughts on this unconscious bias that could be happening right now?
Well,
is it really true? Is it true that we all may have a little bit of it?
Oh, absolutely. I love what Dr. Hawley said about 20 minutes ago about we all have our biases. Mm-hmm. Especially the part about how we know how to assimilate the majority value so that we survive. And sometimes that's a good thing, but sometimes we can find ourselves promoting assimilation bias in that others like ourselves who may not measure up to what we think they should be doing to be successful, sometimes we subconsciously might penalize our own, just as we are penalized by affinity bias, for example, for some of our white brothers and sisters who may not even be aware that that's what they're doing. Yeah. That it is so deeply, as Dr. Williams, Kari said earlier, baked into our subconsciousness that it's going to take a strength-based approach, but we're going to have to, in using that strength-based approach, retrain our minds subconsciously to overcome those biases and replace them with more equitable minded thoughts and concepts. So it's real. Implicit biases are very real, and they probably are the #1 driving force behind the fear that causes resistance to equity. And they probably are the #1 driving force in maintaining our present systems of inequity. And the great news is, just like it took 500 years for this mess, and I like to be plain spoken, it took 500 years for this mess, inequity, systems and things, from false religious interpretations of Christianity, pseudoscience, and all of the myriad of techniques used to create the mindset that led people to have these implicit biases that work against people of color. It will take a few years to untrain, to transform that type of thinking, where it's more equitable. And I like to think that we can go from doing these microaggressions, which are daily reminders of the implicit bias, to doing micro affirmations, which will replace those thoughts in all of us so that we can become more effective. But I would say it is the number one driving force, and certainly the strategies that are being utilized at the present time and the new innovative tools that will be used to help deal with the implicit bias will go a long way in changing the mindset and permanently etching our progress toward equity.
Yes, well, I can see already, and one of the questions that I would ask the panel is, should implicit bias education be taught in schools? And I'm pretty much, yeah, you're doing it.
Yeah,
wow, thank you. You know, and I come from Oklahoma. My family is natives of Oklahoma. And this wasn't taught in our schools, and it's not being taught now. How do we get it taught? How do we ingrain this into our school system? Maybe that Dr. Hawley.
It's being done. The work right now is on the margins in some places, but so implicit bias is one of those little soft terms I talk about. So you have to be ready for my workshops.
Okay.
But we have, the first thing we have to talk about is anti-Blackness. And we have to talk about internalized racial superiority and internalized racial inferiority, right? So there's a beautiful group, People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, out of New Orleans. They've been around for 40 years. They are people that have been doing this work for a long time, and they have these principles that talk about, if you're really going to get to the bedrock of race issues, you're going to have to deal with what we're looking at. It took 400 years for people to look at the people who look like us on here and decide that we were inferior or that we were less than human. And that is baked into the soul of America. It just is. You can't have people in bondage for 400 years. And, you know, people will tell you, oh, we had slavery. There was slavery in other places, but never was it about melanin in the skin. We are hyper visible, and we're also hyper invisible, right? And so a lot of times people don't want to talk about race issues. They were like, one of my good friends in South Carolina, white woman, first time many years ago, Stephanie, I don't see you as Black. I was like, whoa, you missed the best part of me. And what she told me was, and you know, people are what we call color averse. They want to act like they don't see color. I used to say color blindness is not real, but one of my students who's legally blind told me, Dr. Hawley, that's an ableist statement. So I was like, okay. So I had to back up. So I don't talk about pretending to be colorblind, but you're being color averse. You won't name what's happening. You're acting like, can't we all just be the human race? I said, well, if that was the case, we wouldn't have conversations in these public executions of Black people that have been happening, right? And because we can't name what we're talking about, anti-Blackness, right? We can't talk about, we talk about anti-racism, and people don't understand conceptually what that means. And that means that almost anything that exists needs to be disrupted because it wasn't created for the inclusion of Black or brown people. It just wasn't. And that's why when people say the system's broken, it's not, the system's not broken. It's working for the people it was intended to work for.
Right.
And so it's working. You can look at the data, you can tell a system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. You know, the engineers tell us that. And so when we talk about this thing called implicit bias, we have to nail it. Like, what are we talking about? You know, I have a white friend. We used to bum around the country together. I used to do presentations. And sometimes when people we would show up, they would always assume my friend who had a GED was Dr. Hawley, because if they hadn't met me and they saw a Black and a white woman together, they would come up and they would start talking to Terry and taking her bag and everything. And we would have a good time with it. And then we would make it part of the workshop. Like, why is it that you decided who it was that was Dr. Hawley? And see, that's what we call implicit bias, but it's also an anti-Blackness that our children learned in school when they didn't see Black people in history books except for in chains. And I always say it's terrible for white, Black, and brown children to see the first time Black people show up in your curriculum, they're in chains. They don't go back to African kingdoms. They don't start with the strength. They don't start with the beauty of cultures. We always see ourselves on the margins. So you have to understand that implicit bias has been, this bias has been taught. It's who you see in the textbooks and who you don't. Who do you see in front of the room and who you don't see in front of the room? Who's running the school? Who's running the college? Who's running the university? And so it's really important for us to be able to name what we're talking about. There's ableist language. I just gave you the example of, the student telling me about talking about color blindness. That's a bias on my part, right? Not noticing that I'm using ableist language. Right. All of those things are things that we got taught, maybe not even directly, but we learned who was smart, who wasn't. Teachers learned who to call on. When I work with we used to work with student teachers, I'd have to point out to them, there was a little Black boy in the back of the room just waving his hand wildly and you never called on him. And he's been waving, and after a while that child gets demoralized. And after a while, that child begins to realize he doesn't belong in the classroom. And after a while, that child begins to act up in ways that gets attention, negative attention. And so all of those things are a part of this cultural milieu, this culture that we have. And we have to teach children what anti-Blackness looks like. Right at ASD right now, we've got our students who are reading How to Be an Anti-Racist. Our principals will begin reading the book, Dr. Ibrahim Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, because we want people to have common language, because we can get past our implicit biases if we can name them, and then also if we can gather a common language. Because like I told you, when I say white supremacy, there are a lot of words I can say that can just trigger the lizard brain in people's heads and make them run. And when we do learning experiences, we can't jack up people's lizard brains so bad that they don't want to stay in the conversation. And so we build a relationship with them until we can start to use stronger language and more direct language. And you teach people how to interrogate their own implicit biases. Now, there are some people that have some biases that just aren't even implicit. And as Mr. Davis was saying earlier, there are some people, the Navajo have a saying, they say, you can't wake a man who's pretending to be asleep. There are some people that clearly know what's happening. They know what's going on, and they feel that they will lose power, they will lose resources, and so they've got to pretend that they can't see what all of us are seeing. And so the work of teaching people about implicit bias has to be done by people who are professionals, who understand the psychology behind talking about race, and making sure it's just not another unit or worksheet that the children do, or part of a course, but there has to be some depth to it so that when people leave that learning experience, whether it's a class or a workshop, that they can never see the world the same way. And that's the work that the three of us get to do, right? We get to either do the work or find the facilitators who can help people move to a place where they can never go back to pretending that they can't see inequities and they can't see unfairness. So yeah, absolutely, it has to be taught, but parents have to be taught. All of us have to be taught about what it is our lived experiences taught us about who's superior and who's inferior.
Exactly. I totally concur with you at 100% on that. And right, that's all right. I think that we are just concurring. We say yes, thank you so much, Dr. Stephanie Hawley. Yeah. You certainly have covered that base when it comes to implicit bias and education and the need for education into our community of education. So thank you so very, very much.
I think definitely open minds and open hearts. So whether it's
Okay.
our students, whether it's our staff, whether it's our faculty, community members, we have to be willing to be at the table and have the conversation. So if we're not there, we have to work towards that before we can have the conversation.
I agree 100%. When considering equity, do you feel that race plays a part in wealth distribution?
Absolutely, with an exclamation mark.
Mr. Davis, he came right on in there. Go ahead, talk to us about it.
What we know from the history of our country and for many, many parts of the rest of the Western world is the entire driving force behind slavery was money. And because Christianity, for example, was such a big part of the identity of those who did the enslaving, it had to be turned into something that it's not, because the scriptures say the love of money is the root of all evil. And so since that time, wealth distribution is a reflection both of power and of people's attitude that people like ourselves are inferior and less desirable and less deserving. And so absolutely, and to an extent, that's probably a second key reason that inequities persist in our culture, is to maintain as much economic power where it's concentrated presently. The good news is, though, reconstructing the proper understanding, for example, of Christianity can go a long way in helping latch on to the innate goodness and sense of justice that people in power have. When I talk with my white colleagues, brothers and sisters, I have a simple saying: you don't need white privilege to survive and thrive. You don't need it. And it's not an accurate reflection of who you really are. So it makes no sense to continue to support something that is in direct conflict with what you say is important to you. It's important to you as part of your self-identity to be thought of as a good person, a fair and a just and equitable person. Our Constitution, quote unquote, the Holy Bible, all of these things we believe, and of course other wonderful religious and other compelling human points of view, all seem to focus on the idea that human beings are deserving of being treated as human beings and given every reasonable opportunity. We say it, so here's an opportunity to practice what you preach and to live what you teach. Put on this lens. We have to train people and help people through relationships and through the myriad of resources available on anti-racism, equity-mindedness, cultural proficiency, whatever we want to call it, whatever we want to use. We have to help people cultivate and develop that mindset to where they look at each other differently. Like Dr. Hawley said, for 400 years, we were dehumanized. We were dehumanized so that we could become a cheap, easy, free source of labor to help produce wealth and build up this country. And now what has to happen is, whether you want to call it through guilt, whatever you want to call it, we have to help people become their true selves. They say they want to be better people, and I believe they do, because I do believe the Creator put the desire in human beings to want to do what's right and what's appropriate. So the hope and the possibility is there. And as we build these relationships, and as we carefully yet steadily and strategically build people up to and through these difficult conversations, followed up by taking difficult actions to break down these structures and these systems that continue to fuel the distribution of wealth in this country, that's when we're going to make a difference. But yes, the love of money is the root of all evil. And certainly one could make a case for that being a continuing driving force in inequities. But fortunately, people, white people, people of color, all human beings have this innate desire, the substantial majority. They want to do what is right, what is fair, what is just and appropriate. And so we have to create and utilize the tools that will help them get there, help them get over that self-identity threat that causes them to flee when we talk about racism, when we talk about colorism, when we talk about inequity. We have to give them the tools to overcome that self-threat to the identity and let them know all good human beings make mistakes, but we can learn from our mistakes. We can grow from our mistakes, and we can change. We can take on the behaviors, the mindsets, and the practices that will restore equity, justice, and a sense of, you know what, we're all human beings. We're different, but we're human. Mm-hmm. And that can and will make the difference. And so, yes.
Options and tools. Thank you so much. Very well said. Thank you so much. I think we are doing a hand clap. Come on, guys. Do that.
No, I really appreciate you framing, because this work is never done without the history. And unfortunately, slavery continues. We don't talk about it. I'm working on a project now at Austin Independent School District, and we're talking about breaking the school to prison pipeline. We can predict the students that get detention or suspended early on in school. They go to these for-profit prisons.
That's right.
And this is where predominantly, we're roughly 13%, 12 point something, 13% of the population, but we make up the majority of the folks in prisons. And so that economic greed, that dehumanization continues. And I wish we could break that curse. That is a curse that has been on, even after emancipation, prison became the way of enslaving people of African descent. And so consequently, yes, you see the wealth. You see the lack of wealth in our community because 400 years of enriching other people. You see, that doesn't disappear overnight. And then you even see when Black entrepreneurs, a lot of wealth was lost back in 2007 with the housing crisis, because most Black wealth was in homes. And people started businesses with that equity in their homes. Yeah. And now, even during COVID, I know so many Black business owners who have lost their business during this crisis. And so, because Black people tend to be more vulnerable because other people had a 400-year head start, the wealth gap persists. And it's not because people, a lot of times people like to label or pathologize Black people for not having the same wealth or income as other groups. But there are no other groups that have ever been chattel slavery, and it's never been addressed. The repair work, the psychological work, any of that, people just, when they were emancipated, if they weren't returned to slavery through prisons, it's amazing that we're here. And we're always the people who have to try to convince people that we are human. White people don't have to talk about, humanity. And Black people we lead in calling other people into their full humanity. From Dr. King and Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer, and just when we know our history, Ida B. Wells, we are the people that have called America into being America. And this wave of this uprising, it's a global uprising, New Zealand, Paris, England. I've never seen anything so sustained in my life of Black, brown, white folks putting their bodies on the line because the inhumanity is too much to bear. And Black people, once again, are leading the charge to call America into her full humanity. And the people who are upset about all of this, they just require that the protesters be perfect and protest in the way we think you ought to protest. Even though this country was born in...
I don't want you to go too far with that because I am going to ask a question about this part.
Yeah, so you should just know that this economic thing, this economic exploitation of Black bodies and the lack of wealth that we see in our communities is 400 years long. And this generation of, I say, children, our youth, they're trying to break the back on this evil because racism is evil.
Yes.
It's evil. And the children are standing up, and some of them got it right, and some of them got it, some of them are doing things we wish they weren't doing, but you know what? They are standing up and they're in community. Yeah. And they're doing the best that they can do. So, yeah. I don't want us to get away from that moment of what our youth are doing and our young people are doing, and they're sustaining looking evil in the face. Yes. And calling it what it is.
We can be proud of, so much we can be proud of those who are rallying together. And I love it that it is a diverse culture of people that have come together to do so. And we're going to get there in just a few minutes, but this just kind of leads me right on into the statistics that I made you all aware of earlier, that African-American males' lifetime risk of being killed by police per 100,000 people in other classes or races is at 98%. Over any other race of people in the United States. These statistics cannot be ignored. They cannot be ignored. We have to talk about this. And Dr. Khari, I want to give you the platform on this to talk about this. What solutions can you offer to begin turning these statistics around? It's not that I want to have Dr. Stephanie as well as Minister Larry to also chime in, but I would like for you to just lead out in that conversation.
Yeah, so I share a story that I'll share a story that I often share when I do trainings or workshops. But I'm born and raised in Flint, Michigan, so in a community where everyone...
Oh, I love Flint, Michigan. I haven't been there in a long time. That's one of my favorite places to go.
Me too. I agree. But so even in that being part of my experience, about 10 years ago, I took on a new role as a diversity trainer for a small nonprofit in a community called Holland, Michigan. So about 2.5 hours from Flint.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, yep. And I was looking for a new apartment because I was commuting and I wanted to be closer to the job. And so I was in this new apartment complex, and I was it was probably around 6 o'clock. I just got off of work. I probably had a shirt and tie on similar to this. And I was walking around the community and I turned a corner. So this is, if you could picture like the backside of an apartment complex where there's a little patio and there's often barbecue grills. At the end of the pathway on a patio, there was a group of African-American men. They were probably in their early 20s, and they were socializing and they were barbecuing. My intention was to walk in their direction, but when I saw them, I turned and went the other way. So as I'm walking in the opposite direction, I have this conversation with myself in my head, and I said, Kari, why did you just do that? And I corrected it. I turned around, I went down the path, and I had a great conversation with the gentleman. I ended up moving into the community. They told me all about it. They invited me over. But I share that to just highlight the fact that even as a person of color myself, even as a Black man in this world and in this country, even being born and raised in a community where everyone looked just like me, and these are my people, I'll still receive messages around what it can potentially mean when you see a group of young African-American men. And that those messages have impacted me, even though I am that. So I think how we change it is being able to have honest and candid conversations about the fact that we all have some issues. We've all received these messages. We've all been impacted by these messages. If I as a professional can say I don't always do everything right, then how can we not have an honest conversation about the fact that police officers may also make some missteps and make some mistakes? So I think it's having those conversations and saying how can we do better at training law enforcement, police officers, judges, lawyers, but all people. I think that these things occur in different ways in all industries. It's just that it doesn't always result in loss of life. So I think we just have to be courageous enough to say we all make mistakes. Police officers. I worked in higher ed for almost 14 years. I've always had great relationships with those police officers, but I can tell you that I don't feel I don't feel as safe once I leave the confines of my campuses. And I've had some, even as a educated, productive, someone who works to uplift and support students, someone who is fairly cultured, fairly educated. I don't always wear a suit, and I've had some experiences where they have reminded me that people view me a certain way because I'm a man of color. So I think it's just being able to have those honest conversations about the fact that we all make missteps around kind of diversity and equity, and that we need to do better at training ourselves up in all of our different industries.
Yes. When you say training each other, you're talking about each other as a Black people?
No, I mean specifically that we need to. How are we training and developing police officers and lawyers and judges? How are we training and developing faculty and staff and mayors and councilmen?
Yes.
It has to be a discussion that we're all having in all industries.
I got you. Certainly. Any other solutions that you can offer to begin turning these statistics around? How about you, Minister Larry?
Well, I was sitting there thinking, as as Dr. Williams was sharing, and I absolutely concur with him that there needs to be an improvement within the way police officers are trained to be more equitable minded and more culturally proficient. But I want to add this too. There are very, very few things that you can call a silver bullet, but I guarantee you what will really supercharge the movement to reform police is to limit substantially, I know they're not going to remove it, but to limit substantially immunity for the inappropriate use of violence and force. I'm a pragmatic person, and people are saying defund the police. Well, depending upon how you define defund,
Right.
Police are a useful part of our society,
Right.
and they are necessary, and they are actually a valuable resource when properly calibrated to serve all people and not just, as some do in some cases. But I guarantee you, without batting an eye, if our country got the political will, and I think if enough people pressured the legislature to do it, whether it be local, national, federal, limiting immunity. There are some good officers who make good faith decisions in how they utilize violence to handle circumstances, and we certainly don't want to cut them off at the legs. But for these individuals that have persistently been utilizing that role to abuse, misuse, and not treat equitably people like ourselves, that limiting liability will force more and more professionals in that field to take more seriously that need to not allow their implicit biases to get in the way of negatively impacting the way they serve. We have a lot of good policemen. There is no doubt about it. And I agree with the concurrence that the majority of police officers and lawmen are just, fair, and attempting to do their jobs. However, we cannot ignore the pace of unnecessary deaths of people like ourselves due to their hands. And if a policeman understands that not only can he or she go to jail for inappropriately deploying violent force against people of color or anyone that is marginalized, and if they also know that whatever pensions retirement, of funds they're
Yes.
eligible to get is subject to being touched. I guarantee you, I guarantee you, we will see a dramatic change in the way policing is done in this country. So
Yes.
I think that's one solution that I would throw on the table.
I think that's a good solution. I think that's a good solution. Both of you, thank you so much. Yes, Dr. Stephanie, do you have a solution for this? Oh, I'm sorry, you're on mute.
I appreciate what both of the panelists have had to say. I'm probably a little bit more radical in my thinking. Very few of us know the history of policing. Policing was invented to police Black people, particularly those enslaved Africans who were running away from plantations. And that's the roots of your police department. And I've watched for years and years and years and years. This has been going on for a long time. The only reason that it's coming to the fore is because everybody's got a camera.
Cameras.
And there are things that we are witnessing.
Those darn cameras.
But it's systemic. And so
Yeah.
you can't really take people, well, you can. I don't know that training is enough, right? That you can take people who have been socialized, educated, and sometimes are on steroids. You know, a lot of studies are coming out about the fear that police, so we're back to what I talked about earlier, fear. And so people who are fearful and afraid of Black people tend to shoot Black people. You know, over the last few months, we've seen it because we've all been still and we've all been stuck in spaces and housed in, you know, sheltering in place. And we are seeing things that we never would have seen if we hadn't been called to a halt by this pandemic. And, you know, people say defund the police and people lose their minds. They defund education all the time. The legislature will cut funding to the community college. The legislature will cut funding to public school. We don't call it defunding, but we defund, the legislature defunds really important institutions all the time. As soon as, and that's what I was telling you all earlier about power. As soon as you walk up to power, what did I tell you? Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a struggle. And so when you start talking about the police, you have just walked up on one of the biggest powers in the country. Many, in the city of Austin, you can check out how the city of Austin took out roughly $150 million, if I'm not mistaken, 147 million, I think to be exact. And they started looking at, you don't need to call the police every time there's every time there's a mental health incident, if somebody is suicidal, because for Black people to call the police is to put everybody at risk.
At risk, yes.
Everybody's at risk because we don't know who's going to show up. We don't know who's going to think, who the policeman is going to think is the victim or the perpetrator or the problem. And so they're literally, we have seen too much videotape of people who called the police and wound up in handcuffs. And the reason why I have such a fire in my soul about this is my son, who's in his 30s, had a classmate. You know, this is one of the ways that education doesn't protect you. A college-educated Black man going for a jog forgot his ID. This was in San Antonio just a few weeks ago. Policeman had on a body cam. This young man was tortured and they knew that he wasn't the suspect. They knew that he wasn't the suspect. They brought the woman who had been beaten up by her boyfriend and she said, no, this is not him. But that young man spent 2 days in jail. 2 days in jail, and the body cam recorded 90 minutes of the police playing. So now that's only one recording, right? So these things are happening all over the country. So you got a systemic issue, and it won't change by us patting people on the hand because these mistakes are deadly. Like people are dying, right? You all can do the roll call. We can do the roll call on all the names. Mike Ramos here in Austin, Texas, right? I made a list one night of all, beautiful brother that the police suffocated here in Williamson County. I mean, the list is endless. At some point, we can't keep saying a few bad apples. We got an orchard
No,
problem.
there's a lot more when you get 98%.
Yeah, we've got an orchard problem. And so, yes, I agree with Dr. Williams that training is important. And, you know, there probably needs to be a better way of selecting candidates to even be in the police force. And
Yeah.
I agree with Mr. Davis about, yes, if people know they're going to lose their pensions and there's not going to be this immunity, there won't be this blue wall of protection, right? The behaviors may be different, but I do think that taking some of that funding, because why do you need artillery? I mean, in Austin, we saw the kind of weaponry that people take to war against citizens. I saw children tear gassed in Austin, Texas, right?
Wow.
And then a few days later, we see the police taking a knee and the manipulation of the crowd, but they had hit people. A young man from San Marcos lost his eye. Peaceful protesters
Yes.
lost their eye. So I think we got to get real about these aren't mistakes. There's something systemic here. And some of these people do this as police officers, do this when they know cameras are running. And so there's something physically, emotionally, psychologically going on in human beings that can put their knee on somebody's neck and look into a camera.
Yeah.
Know that they're being recorded. There's something that's not right with all of these systems. And what we do is all of us know a good policeman. We all know a good police person. I know a
Yes,
couple
I
here
do.
in Austin.
Mhm.
But what we have to do is look at the system that allowed this kind of brutality and the predictability. We can predict who the police are going to kill. We can predict in what neighborhoods the damage will and the murder will be done. And so if we can do that, that means we need to look at the system. And yes, reallocating money for mental health, all of the things that people actually need. And it was Chaz Moore with the Austin Justice Coalition who said it so beautifully the other day on another discussion I had. He said, we've got to separate police from safety. Everybody, there's always this belief that police equals safety, and it's not always true for Black people, that police equals safety. And so we've got to have some hard conversations about the systemic change. And then what do we when we take money away for artillery and all of the weaponry that's being purchased, all of the things that are going on, how do we reinvest that into what is needed by the community? Does it call for a mental health specialist instead of a policeman? What does it call for? Every emergency should not require the police to show up. We have too many emergencies where police are called. Several years ago, probably none of you were here, there was a boy, 17 years old, who had a mental episode, was naked, clearly had no weapon, was shot down by Austin police. Why?
Right.
Clearly that he was no threat. And so all of these things are things that we have to unpack, and we have to say, what is it that the communities need? Because the community doesn't always need a police person to show up to the scene, because that puts most Black people in jeopardy. I'm sorry, but that's
Yes,
what
it
the
does.
statistics show us. So
Yes.
we've got systemic work to do. And what both of you have said, I totally agree with, but I think we're going to have to go further. And maybe we don't call it defund the police or divest police, but we talk about reallocating funding to invest in human
I like that reallocation.
support.
Yes,
Yeah.
reallocating those funds. I certainly agree with that as well. And I agree with every one of you. Thank you so much. You spoke very highly intelligently about this subject. And it was so troubling in my spirit when I saw the statistics. I said, okay, we've got to bring this to the forum. I want to hear what you all have to say about this. And the community that is listening in are listening. They want to know. They want to know, what can we do? How can we make things better? And you have brought to the table some real solutions, and I believe we're going to be just start. We're going to start implementing and doing these things, educating, talking about these things, building platforms, looking at funding and even some deep funding or our reallocations or however, because those things are very real. It's very true. And then getting on these city councils and city boards and city this and that. We really need to be a part as a people of color or Black people or brown people, whatever you want to call yourself. We are in this thing together, right? And we need to make a difference, and we can make a difference, and we are making a difference. So we want our audience to understand that this is a very positive conversation that is leading us to solutions, leading us to the answer, workable solutions that's going to help our society, help our city of Austin, Texas as well. And I want to appreciate again AFTV5 for giving us this opportunity. We're going to start coming to a close now, but I do want to ask just a couple of more questions. Do you all feel that the talks of racism, social and systemic injustice, and disparities among Blacks solve these issues or make it a bigger issue than it needs to be? So do we need to continue conversations, or do we just need to just start looking for solutions? Just, you know, just moving into action. What? Let me hear from Dr. Williams.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, I think we have to continue the conversations because not everyone's on the same page that the issues are real. So I think that's a good starting point before we can develop solutions, because people are so resistant to solutions because they don't believe there's a problem. So I think we have to have more conversations, and we have to be able to be honest that we have work to do. So whether it's the Austin community or our institution, I think leaders have to be on the same page that we can do better, and we do have some issues. We call them equity blind spots, but essentially that we have some areas within our institution or within our community, around our policies and practices that aren't serving every community member in an equal and just way. So I think we have to have those conversations to help people understand what the issues are before we can develop solutions that people are going to be resistant to because they're just not on the same page about the issue.
And we're going to have to convince them that this is important, because I'm among a broad community of people, and when I listen to my own Black people, some of them are saying, we're tired of talking about this. We're tired. We don't want to talk about this anymore. How can you continue to encourage them that this is important? We need to keep talking about this. What do you think, Minister Davis?
John Lewis, our hero who was honored recently after his death, for 80 years, persisted not only in the conversation, but also in taking action to bring about change.
Yeah.
What we have to remind our people, anybody, you have to build a house one brick at a time. And just because you get tired, or just because something goes wrong with the construction and you sort of have to semi-start over, if you want a house, you keep on building that house. You keep on persisting until the job is done. I agree with my colleague, Dr. Williams, that the conversations have to continue. Inequities is untenable. The conversations have to continue. At the same time, there is some work and action that needs to be taken as well.
Yeah.
I tell people I work with all the time, it's never really either or, it's always and. So the conversations need to continue, and at the same time, the work, however small, however medium, however big, it needs to continue. And just remember this, Rosa Parks' act of defiance on the bus wasn't the one act that triggered everything. Rosa Parks had been engaged in smaller, consistent acts previous to that time. And what I tell professionals and people I work with in equity, take the small step, but continue and sustain the small step. Add a next step, a next step, a next step. You have to be steadfast, unmovable, and always abounding in the work to get it completely done. And so I resonate with what Dr. Williams said, and I would just add the work that we can do, both black and white, and all others. What you can do, do it, and do it consistently, and don't stop. And in time, our collective effort will bring about the outcomes we're looking for.
We're not going to do a lot of talking. We're going to do the work. We got to do the work. We got to move into action. I like that. Thank you so much. Thank you. We're certainly going to miss our brother, John Lewis. We're going to miss him. All right. Dr. Stephanie, do you think we should keep on talking about this, or just say hey?
We have to keep talking, because just because we've been talking doesn't mean other people have been. So everybody joins the conversation in different places.
Everybody join in.
And you have to bring some humility and some grace and some empathy for people who just showed up. You know, there are folks that they just showed up to this in March, right?
Right.
And what I can't do is say, I've been doing this work all my life. Nobody wants to hear that. They want to hear, they need a partner. They need somebody who can listen to them and help them unpack. And so we talk and we work. Those of us who have been doing it, we talk and we work, because talking is part of the work if the talking is helping us build relationships. And also, and then part of the work that we have to do is to build community so we can do things together. And you can't, Einstein said, you can't solve a problem from the same state of mind that created it, right? And so when we're with white people who help build and keep these systems together, they can't come up with solutions until their minds are changed. And their minds probably are not going to be changed without being in relationship with people who can disrupt their thinking. And that again is if they are people of goodwill and who actually really want to subject themselves to being disrupted. And so I say all that to say, talking can be work as long as it doesn't get hijacked and people start thinking talking is the only work. And that's what can happen. People can just wind up making topics and, you know, social media. We talk about performative activism, right? People who perform and try to look like they're involved, but they're not taking any risks. This work is about taking risks to be ostracized by organizations, to be marginalized. And if everybody's happy, if you're an equity officer and everybody's happy with what you're doing and everybody is happy and going along, you might not be doing the work you think you're doing, because this work is disruptive work. But you're not prepared to disrupt the work until you've built relationships, and that requires the talking that sometimes people are tired of. So it is, it's never, as Mr. Davis said, it's never either or, it really is both and, but we have to be discerning enough to know when the talk is going nowhere and when the talk is a distraction. And it keeps the same power structures in place. So there's different kinds of talk. I guess that's what I mean to say, different kinds of talk that we have to do in this work.
That is so true. That is so true. I concur with every one of you. Thank you so very much for that. And we're going to continue our discussions, but we're not just going to talk. We're going to move into action. We are moving into action. And that's why you see these leaders and colleges and then our ISD schools and all of this. And this is where we need to be. This is where we're supposed to be in order to make a difference. And so we're asking all of our audience to continue to pursue your goals, your dreams, your aspirations, your careers and all that. Yes, certainly, people of color, Black people, brown people, we need you into political offices. We need you everywhere. We want you to just expand. There are no limits. And don't forget, God is on your side. If God be for you, it's more than the world against you. I want to encourage you to that. Be a person, be a woman of faith, be a man of faith, and stand strong and know that you are destined to succeed. I really want to encourage our audience that way. And finally, as we come to a close, I'll ask one more question, then our panelists will have those last words. We see a diverse race of people protesting injustice How can we as humanity begin moving from protest to power? We see NBA players boycotting, millennials standing strong in the streets. Each panelist, I'm going to ask you if you just take 1 minute, just 1 minute, and talk about solutions. How can we take people from the protest to the power? Not that we will never ever protest ever again. No, we're going to protest. It's necessary on many fronts. But how can we just say, you know what, you've done that job, you're doing a good job. How can we take them to that place of power where they're finally seeing results? They're moving into a power place mentally, emotionally, socially, and in every manner. How can we do that? Who wants to raise their hand and say, I'll go first? Who will go first?
I'll go. I think, I think absolutely we have an election coming up. We need to all be active and engaged in the political process, not just nationally, but also locally. Locally is in some respects even more important. So I think we talk to students all the time, and I say, if you can't be mad and you're not voting, because you're telling me that you're not really mad. So I think we have to use our voice and the power that we do have. So whether it be you have issues with the school system, but you're not going to the PTA meeting, or you have issues with your city government, but you're not at the council meetings, or you have issues with your college, but you don't go to the board of trustees meeting, or you won't run for student government. We all have power, we're not fully using it. So I think it means that we have to use our voice, and we have to use the power that we do have, and we have to take action versus just complaining or posting on social media. We have to stand up and use the power that we do have.
Very good, very good. Anyone else want to chime in?
The present circumstances and trouble, particularly the racism, the resurgence of it, the things that we're wrestling with, has been a blessing in the sense that it's created opportunities. There are a substantial number of white brothers and sisters who want input from us and who do want to work with us to make a difference. So when these opportunities, doors are opened and we have the opportunity to receive jobs that weren't open prior to this period of history, opportunities on councils and things of this nature where we're invited to participate, step in there and participate. But when you participate, bring equity mindedness with you. Give the powers that be the information that they need and hold them accountable for following through on that information to make a difference. The protests are wonderful, and some tables are open and we're being invited. So let's step into those tables and let's use that opportunity to further what needs to be done.
Thank you so very much. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Dr. Stephanie Hawley, you have the last word. Go ahead.
I feel like both of these gentlemen were the benediction on this situation, but I would just say that people have to find I love what Dr. Williams said in terms of everybody has power. You know, sometimes we talk about we're going to empower somebody. I can't empower anybody. You can't empower everybody's already got power. We can't help people find their power. And I think some of that is a part of what we can do is to help people find their power, find their collective power, because people are stronger in community. And these protests have been so strong and sustained because people are in community finding their power, and they're finding that there are policies and systems that are changing. And some of the police departments, there have been reallocations of funding, there have been changes. And so people are seeing that. And I think everybody has to figure out what is their role. You can't do everything, but it may be to organize people to go vote. It may be that you call your board of trustees and hold them accountable for policy change. Everybody has to look at their sphere of influence and also see what organizations already exist that are doing work. Oftentimes people will go and try to, create a new organization as if, you know, these others aren't around, join the folks that are being positive, constructive, and are making progress and moving through. So there are many things we can do, but we've all been called to different action, but you must act. Talk alone will not be enough. You must act, and act with others. Act in community. Don't be a lone ranger, but make sure that you're joining hands with other people who understand that this is a marathon and not a sprint.
Yes.
And that's why you can't do this alone. You must do it with other people, because when you get tired and sit down, others will continue to run. When they get tired, you get up and you run. But you have to know what your role is on a spiritual level in order for you to do this work for any sustained period.
Fantastic. Well, you heard it from here at AFTV5 Broadcast Network. Thank you so very much, panelists. You did an excellent job. Wonderful discussion. I applaud you. Thank you for being our guest this evening, for your time that you have taken out of your busy schedule to really just take this and bathe it and make sure that the community is educated. They're knowledgeable. They understand what's happening in our community of Austin, Texas, as well as abroad in the United States. Thank you that this AFTV broadcast goes worldwide, and we're just so happy for our audience to have joined us on this evening. We certainly appreciate your time and attention. As you can see, this is a very important and vital topic that we talk about. Equity, inclusion, diversity, very important that our companies and businesses and schools, educational systems, every facet of our world, that we take on this and that we together become a society that is full of power and empowering one another and helping and assisting one another to move forward. We certainly do appreciate this opportunity and just to be here and to be on. And I want to tell the panelists, once again, you did an excellent job. I'm so proud of what you're doing. I look forward to meeting you face to face. And when this pandemic is over, you just might get a hug from me. You all are beautiful, powerful people. And I'm so happy that our community is blessed by you and what you do. God bless every one of you. Thank you for this opportunity, and to our audience.
Thank you for having us.